brain and the body, physical and emotional health, it's all connected. Today, my special guest, Kiran, is going to help us understand some ways our nutrition can affect our emotional health. Hi, and welcome to my channel. I'm Kim Feeney with Butterfly Beginnings Counseling. I'm a licensed independent social worker and a registered play therapist supervisor with over 10 years of experience helping hundreds of children and families lead healthier emotional lives. If this sounds like something your family could use, subscribe and hit the bell for weekly notifications on the latest content. I am super excited because today I have a special guest joining us, Kiran. Kiran is a holistic nutritionist who helps women and children leverage a plant-based diet to get rid of negative symptoms that keep them from enjoying their life to the fullest. As a mom of a child who once suffered from poor gut health and GERD, she took matters into her own hands to get to the root of her daughter's symptoms. She now teaches other parents how to harness the power of optimal nutrition to help their children truly thrive. So welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thanks for having me here.
So glad you're here today. Tell us your story and how you got into doing what you're doing now.
Yes. So I always love telling my story because I always like to say that, our life's, adversities and challenges are really teaching lessons. And it's so true in my life. My daughter was born with some gut health issues, and I was very confused, and I struggled a lot when she was younger, and she struggled a lot, and we couldn't really figure out what was going on. I kind of took her to a few different doctors, to, a few different pediatricians, and nobody could really give me any answers. She spat up a lot. She was, kind of just barely hanging on in her growth curve. I would spend hours a day feeding her and it still wasn't bringing her up. She was still so skinny. And I would look at all these other chubby, cute, adorable babies. My daughter was adorable, but she wasn't chubby. She was skinny. Mm-hmm. And I always wanted that chubby baby. And I would look at these other chubby babies and I would think, I'm doing something wrong. What is going on here? Why is my daughter so skinny and why can't I get her to gain weight? Mm-hmm. And why does she always seem to be uncomfortable and spitting up? I could, hear that silent reflux. Moms of kids who've had reflux will understand this, where you literally hear the sound of vomit coming up and going back down. And I would think this is not normal. And I would, go to the doctor and they would say, well, you can give her this medication. That's really all we can do. And that in my gut, it just didn't feel right. And I knew there must be some other way, that there must be something else I can do. And she was so little. She was just a baby. I didn't want to put her on medications now that she was going to have to stay on for possibly her whole life. So I started looking and researching and trying to find a different way. And so I came across a lot of helpful information, but I also found a lot of not so helpful information. So I did a lot of trial and error. And then finally, I just thought, okay, this is going on and this is taking forever. And she was 3 at this point when I finally decided to just go back to school and become a holistic nutritionist, because the holistic nutrition field really, it seemed to just be calling my name. It really spoke to me. I kind of looked at different avenues and I thought, this is the one that I really feel is going to help my daughter. And it just felt right. So I went through that route and I went back to school and I used what I learned to fix her gut issues. And so she's thriving and healthy. I'm not worried about her weight anymore. She just turned 9. And for several years now, she's been thriving and no GERD, no other gut issues. And she's been doing so well. And so I made a career out of it after I finished school. I thought, well, I've helped her, I would love to help other families as well, because this information needs to get out there. And parents need to know that their kids don't have to live with these symptoms, things like eczema, asthma, chronic allergies, multiple food sensitivities, these things that we've accepted as normal in today's, society, in today's day and age. They're not normal. They're common, but that doesn't make them normal. And so I really want to get that message out there and help as many families as possible help, their kids truly thrive, because if they do have these symptoms, they're not truly thriving. They're living and they're, I'm sure they're enjoying their lives still, but they could be doing so much better if they could live without those symptoms.
That is an amazing story. And I truly admire your willingness to go back to school and learn and to figure it out on your own when you weren't getting what you needed through traditional routes. That's just so empowering.
Yes, it was just something that I was just so driven to do. And I just knew in my gut there's a different way and I need to learn it. And then once I learned it and I applied it to my own daughter, I thought, I need to help other families too with this. This is so crucial and it's so helpful and it's so important. So now that's what I do. And I've helped so many families, reverse their own children's symptoms and to help them just really thrive. And, I decided to go the plant-based route because I myself was already plant-based. And I just noticed, so I do work with both omnivore and plant-based clients and I meet them where they're at. But I did notice that, a lot of these issues we were seeing were with these animal heavy diets or, they're highly inflammatory. And a lot of these issues are caused by inflammation, by chronic inflammation in the body. And so, the two just fit together.
Awesome. Well, that is what you're here today to do. You're going to explain some things about blood sugar imbalances and gut microbiomes and how those nutritional things can affect our emotional health.
Yes. So, nutrition is so key to mental health and, to children with their behaviors and their moods. It's so important. And obviously, you teach about this on your channel. So there's so many different variables and so many different factors, and nutrition is one of them. And so this is something that I, my group programs and with my clients, I always, talk about the impact of nutrition on mood. And so there's two areas that I like to go into because they are both, equally important when it comes to helping your children kind of regulate their moods and to have more stable moods. One is, making sure their blood sugar is balanced. And the second is their gut microbiome. So I'll start with the blood sugar imbalance. So what happens with a lot of kids is that they're eating diets that are not balanced or they're very high in sugar or processed foods. And it creates these blood sugar spikes and crashes or this, blood sugar high, which is immediately followed by a blood sugar crash. So what happens is it's called postprandial hypoglycemia. That's the, technical term for it, but it's basically just a blood sugar crash. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that when we eat something and the blood sugar enters our bloodstream too quickly, our body releases insulin. And it releases the amount of insulin that it releases is dependent on how much sugar is entering the bloodstream. So if we have a lot of sugar suddenly entering the bloodstream, the body thinks, oh no, we've got to take care of this. We need to release a lot of insulin to help the sugar get out of the blood and into the cells. The problem is when we have this sudden spike in blood sugar, we release too much insulin. And then what happens is that we end up absorbing up all that sugar and then there's not much left in the blood and we get this crash, this sudden crash then. Okay. And so when we get that sudden crash, we can see things like fatigue and headaches and irritability and behavior issues because kids are just not feeling good. And then we get those hangry meltdowns. Every parent knows that hangry meltdown where they're like, I need food right now, or I'm going to turn into a complete monster, or they already have turned into a complete monster.
The behaviors are already there because they're needing that nutrition.
Yes. And so, one way to prevent that is to make sure that what they're eating is balanced. Make sure that they're not eating overly processed foods. They're not eating too much of that. Make sure that they're balancing their meals. So a common mistake that I see with parents is that even if they're feeding them healthy snacks, like say fruit or yogurt or vegetables, veggies, like say carrots or celery or broccoli sticks or something like that, they are not balancing it out. So for example, if they're eating just fruit, that's great. It is healthy and it does have fiber, which does help with sugar, but they also need to add some sort of protein or fat in there as well to help really stabilize the blood sugar and make sure that they don't get this sudden spike in their blood sugar levels. So, they need to include it with, they can say if they're having apple slices, let them dip it in some nut butter or spread some nut butter on it. If they're having some veggies, let them dip that in hummus. If they are having yogurt, yogurt it is higher in protein and fat, but it has no fiber. So add some berries in there, add some nuts and seeds in there, that you can make little energy bites that have, nuts and seeds and dates and, maybe some other sweetener in there grind it up, roll it up into a ball. We've all kind of seen those everywhere now, the power balls, energy bites, they have various names, but they're basically the same thing. Those can be served alongside with any of these fruits or veggies. Or if your kids are having crackers on their own, that's also it's all carbs. There's no balance there. So a lot of these really common snacks and cookies, how many kids have just cookies as a snack? Sure. I'm a nutritionist and my child will still occasionally have a cookie as a treat. I try to make it a healthier version, But even then, I'll still balance it. So I will either make a higher protein cookie that has nut butter in there, or if it's just a plain cookie that doesn't have any of that, then I'll try to balance it. So I'll give her some nuts with it, or I'll give her something that's got that protein and that fat and that fiber with it. And even with, say, something like vegetables with broccoli or that, you can offer some guacamole with it because that's high in fat. That will also help to slow the release of sugar into the bloodstream. So we want to slow down digestion because these carbs are more, they're easily digested and they take less time to digest than protein and fat. And so what happens is that they just kind of rush through the digestive tract, and then they enter the bloodstream. And then we just get all this sugar all of a sudden. And then you get that insulin spike, and then you get that sudden crash. So to avoid that, we want to make sure we balance out their meals and their snacks. So they're not eating just carbs. Carbs are, I'm not demonizing carbs. I can't stand it when people demonize carbs. Carbs are important. Healthy.
I'm a carb lover myself.
Yes, so. Healthy whole carbs. We need to eat plenty of them. Your kids need plenty of them. But just make sure that there's that balance. That's where the issue really arises, is when they're not balanced out by protein and fat as well. So we want to make sure they have that balance. Right. And that will really help to curb those hangry meltdowns.
If we have like a pie chart, we want them to try to be equal slices of fats, protein, and carbs.
So you do want more carbs and then kind of moderate protein and then less fat. So it is a triangle with fat at the top with the smallest portion, and then protein in the middle and carbs on the bottom. All right. So you're right with the triangle, but just it's not equal portions. They're a little bit different.
All right. Good to know.
The other topic that I wanted to discuss was the gut microbiome and how that impacts mood. So this is so exciting. And this is one I could geek out on for a while, but the gut microbiome is this, really hot field in research right now. It's a hot topic in the health and wellness space because we're just learning, every day more things that the gut microbiome does for us and how it impacts everything. And it really does impact mood. So there's something called the gut-brain axis, and that's how the gut and the brain communicate with each other. Right. And so, that works both ways. So if someone is stressed out and they're anxious, their brain is going to send signals to their gut, and it's going to actually impair digestion. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes a cycle, because when it impairs digestion, then, your kids won't absorb all the nutrients they need for their optimal brain health and brain function. And then that in turn also creates, that signal going back again to the gut to, impair digestion. So it becomes this vicious cycle.
Absolutely.
It can also start the other way. It can start from a poor gut microbiome. So the gut microbiome is, let me first explain what that is for, anyone who doesn't know.
That'd be great.
That's basically the collection of microbes, so bacteria and fungi that live in the gut. And they're supposed to be there. There are trillions of them. They serve a purpose. They're supposed to be there. They help us. But some of them aren't so helpful. Some of them can end up harming us. And we need to feed them. So when you're feeding your child, I always like to tell parents, you're not just feeding your child, you're feeding those little critters in their guts too. And you have to be mindful of that. So when you're feeding them lots of, junk food and processed food and lots of high sugar food, you're feeding the not so great, microbes that are in their guts. Those, the ones that wreak havoc on their bodies, they thrive off of the processed foods and the high sugar foods. So when you're feeding your children these foods, it's not only harming their body, but it's also harming their gut microbiome, which is also affecting, their mood and everything else as well. And then when you're feeding them foods that are rich in healthy, fiber, so all plant foods have fiber. So your fruits and vegetables, your legumes, nuts and seeds. When you're feeding them a diet that's rich in those foods, you're feeding the beneficial microbes in their gut. And then you're allowing them to thrive and crowd out the not so great microbes. So we can never really get rid of the harmful microbes mm-hmm. or the pathogenic ones. They're always there. Even if if you give round after round of antibiotics, you will still have some that will survive. And antibiotics kill off the good ones and the bad ones too. Uh-huh. So what we want to do is we want to feed the good ones and starve the bad ones. Mm-hmm. And by starving the bad ones, I mean, don't feed your kids so much sugar and processed food, because then you're also feeding those harmful pathogenic bacteria and yeast as well. And then when you're feeding them the healthy fiber-rich foods, that is feeding the, beneficial bacteria and yeast and allowing them to thrive and grow and kind of outnumber the bad ones. And so what these bacteria do, they have a lot of different functions. They help us digest our food. They also communicate with the brain, and they produce something called neurotransmitters. And they also produce other chemicals that impact the brain. And you've probably discussed neurotransmitters here before, because that's big in, mental health and mood and behavior. And so, 90 to 95% of our serotonin is actually produced in the gut by gut bacteria. which is pretty amazing. And there's other neurotransmitters as well. So there's actually fermented foods are foods that have live microbes in there. So things like kimchi, yogurt, sauerkraut, miso, they have live microbes in there. Some of these have actually been found to contain neurotransmitters like GABA. So they've actually done research on these and found that they're already in, before we thought that, we had to eat these foods and get them into the gut for these microbes to start producing these neurotransmitters. But now we know they're actually already producing them while they're still in the jar. While they're still in that jar of kimchi, there's GABA in there too. Okay. So that's pretty amazing. And so if you can get your kids eating fermented foods from a very young age, that's amazing for their gut health and also for their mental health, because then they're getting these beneficial neurotransmitters and they're getting the bacteria that can help produce more of these. And so these neurotransmitters will communicate with the brain and help to regulate their mood. And so a lot of times when I see kids who are very moody or they have a lot of anxiety, a lot of the kids that I work with, a lot of the parents will, say that their kids have a lot less anxiety, social anxiety, and they're just more, they're just happier overall. They're less irritable. They're less moody once we focus on their gut health and really improving their gut health and the function of their digestive tract, as well as optimizing their gut microbiome to really make sure we've got more of those good guys and not so many of those bad guys. So it's pretty amazing how these little critters in our guts can have such a big impact on mood. And they've been linked to things like schizophrenia and, pretty severe mental health disorders. But, I don't work with people with severe disorders, but just in terms of like ADHD and, irritability and anxiety, I've seen huge improvements in those just by focusing on a child's gut health.
That is so fascinating. I know that I have learned so much just listening to you in these few short minutes. So tell our viewers, where can they find you if they want to learn more about all the information you've got available?
Yes. So you can actually find me over on Instagram. I post there frequently. My hashtag Key to Health NC. So my business name is Key to Health Nutrition Consulting, or abbreviated Key to Health NC. And I also run a free Facebook group for parents. It's called the Raising Healthy Plant-Powered Kids Facebook group. And in that group, I do a weekly live show where, similar to this, where I discuss a different health and nutrition related topic that's related to kids every single week. And so I offer lots of, free advice and free tips in there. And, people are also welcome to post questions. And I always take topic suggestions as well. So that's something that a lot of the parents in the group like, that they are able to just comment on one of my posts or send me a DM to say, hey, we'd really like to know more about this topic. And then I'll work that into my weekly live. So that's somewhere where you can find me and probably get the most information. And if you are curious about nutrition counseling and how, it may affect you or your family, or how it might be beneficial for you, if you have kids who have any of these issues that we've discussed, you are always welcome. Kim will leave the link below. You're welcome to book a free. I always offer free discovery calls. Those are just 20-minute chats just to kind of get a feel for what nutrition counseling can do for you.
Perfect. And we will have those links posted below in the description. Thank you again, Kiran, for joining us. Please consider subscribing, give this video a thumbs up, and we'll see you next week.